Hello, my mid-morning friends. How are you? So good to see you. My name's Jared. I'm one of the pastors on staff here. If you are just joining us, we are in the middle of a series that we've been in for the last couple of weeks called Paradox. If you've ever read the red letters in the scriptures, the words of Jesus, and you felt confused, anybody else? Apparently you're in good company, because you see this with the disciples again and again going, a couple questions, boss. What exactly does the weak made strong mean? What exactly does the poor or rich mean? What exactly does it mean, blessed are the persecuted? How does all this work? And so for the last couple of weeks, for the next several weeks, we're just going to be exploring these paradoxes that Jesus teaches again and again. At the heart of his teaching is these, what we're calling foolish wisdom. On the surface, you're going, I don't understand how that works. But at a deeper level, it begins to make sense. A quick story before we dive in. Today we're going to explore, by the way, this paradox of weakness and strength and how Jesus treats that and what weakness actually is and what strength actually is. But before we do, quick story. About a month ago, I think it was about a month ago, my two oldest boys and Rosanna, my wife, they came inside and they said, Dad, Rosanna didn't call me Dad. She goes, the boys are like, Dad, you're not going to believe it. There's a family of ducks in our backyard. And I was like, my first question was, well, how do you know they're a family? And they're like, well, all the beaks are the same. And they all have tiny little legs. So we go outside, and it was kind of odd at first because the boys could get really close to the ducks, and they were fine. Rosanna could get really close to the ducks. If I opened the back door, the ducks would just fly off. I don't know what that says about me. Ace Ventura, I am not, apparently. And so we kept seeing these ducks, and it was adorable, as ducks are. And so I tell you that to tell you this. About 4 days ago, I think it was Sunday or Monday, I was in the garage, and Dane, our 7-year-old, comes running in. Dad, you're not going to believe it. And I said, what? And he said, Mama Duck has laid around 11 eggs underneath this plant in our backyard. And he was right. I didn't believe it. So I go out, and sure enough, there is 11 eggs or so under this plant at the herd house right now. So if you ever had this happen before, several of you, you maybe know what to do. I have no idea what to do. I told Rosanna, what do we do? We don't even know how to care for the 3 kids we have, let alone 11 eggs here of ducks. Do we take it to the fire station? Like, what do we take it to PetSmart? What's the plan? And so we start Googling, duck gestation periods. Like, how's this going to work? And we quickly realize that in the state of California, this duck has more rights to our property than we do. So I'm staying at a Motel 6 in El Centro for the next several months. And so, like if we even sneeze in the direction of these ducks, the SWAT team shows up. That's how it works. So we're trying to figure out what to do, and I was, you know how you always have that neighbor that knows the answer to everything? You know what I'm talking about? Like Wilson on the other side of the fence. And I was talking to that neighbor, and he's like, well, actually, ducks are quite smart, and Mama Duck has identified your property as a safe place, free of coyotes and things like that, and so that's why she chose it. And I didn't want to start debating the Mensa score of ducks, but I said, well, Mama Duck was apparently not smart enough to notice the 3 human Tasmanian devils that are also here. And so what has happened over the last 4 days again and again, and it's like a quarter of an acre, how do we keep these 3 boys with all their energy away from this fascinating scene of Mama Duck? And so this has been the scene again and again. Dane, back away, put the water gun down. Dane, Mama Duck does not need any help. So just again and again. And we've noticed that anytime you get near this plant where Mama Duck is underneath, she will get kind of angry and start to squawk. And so we've been telling Dane again and again, here's the deal. Mama duck is quite small, 7 pounds or so, and she's quite fragile, and she's nurturing and cultivating this life that is quite fragile. So if you come around her, she's going to try to appear quite strong to scare you away. Because, buddy, you may not realize it, although you are only 7, you are quite strong. And when you come charging towards this mama duck, she gets scared. And so, buddy, real strength is when you can be around this duck and you don't need to show her how strong you are. You can place that strength under control, and you can actually appear quite weak. This duck is quite weak, and she's going to try to appear quite strong. Boys, you guys are quite strong. And for the next couple of months, so Dad does not get arrested, we need to appear quite weak in the presence of this duck. Real strength is when it's actually, when you can take all that 7-year-old boy energy and you can have it under control. I say that because I think Jesus, pardon the theological jump this morning, is trying to teach his disciples something quite similar. If you have a Bible, turn with me to Matthew chapter 26, is where we are going to begin. Matthew 26. So anyway, that's what's going on in the Hurt House. How are you guys? Needless to say, the Easter egg hunt at our house is canceled this year. I found one. No, it's just not. All right, we're just teaching the Bible today. Matthew 26, starting in verse 47. Jesus is critiquing what strength and weakness actually are, and his disciples, again, as they always are confused. So the scene is right before crucifixion, a few hours before the cross. While he was still speaking, this is Jesus, Judas, one of the 12, so he's been with Jesus for 3.5 years, arrived. With him was a large crowd. And this crowd with Judas was armed with swords and clubs, and they'd been sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. So there's a lot of strength, a lot of horsepower in this crowd. They've got the titles, they've got the power, they've got the weapons, they've got the swords, they've got the clubs. So if this is a movie, the scene in this particular moment, swords, clubs, nighttime, some guys with, tiki torches walking in. We're going to arrest Jesus in this particular moment. It's a tense scene. And here's Jesus. He's been praying, and here he is about to be arrested. And it says, now the betrayer, this is Judas, had arranged a signal with him. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, greetings, Rabbi. And he kissed him. And it says, Jesus replied back, I love this, do what you came for, friend. You sort of imagine kind of a Clint Eastwood, sort of cool, calm, collected, do what you came for, friend. Then the men stepped forward. They seized Jesus and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword. We know from the book of John, it was Peter, the impulsive disciple, who reaches for the sword. Now, quite often when there's an embarrassing story about one of the disciples, and these guys are writing this stuff down, they'll just say, well, it's one of the companions that did this embarrassing thing. Not John. He always names names. I kind of like that about John, especially Peter. It's almost like they had some kind of a riff. So he tells you, it was Peter that did the dumb thing. He's the impulsive one. You see that again with John. So it's Peter who does this. With Jesus' companions, he reaches for the sword. So Peter takes the sword. He drew it out and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. So Peter in this moment, it's tense. He's been following Jesus for 3.5 years. There's been this messianic program, if you will. We're gonna change the world, Peter. And Peter's hitched his wagon to Jesus, and here in this moment, he sees it all coming to an end. They've arrested him. They're going to take him away. Everything they've been working for, from water into wine until this moment, in Peter's mind, it's going down the drain. And Peter, the impulsive disciple, I like this guy. I can identify with this guy. Grabs the sword and says, "Don't worry, I got it, boss. I can deal with this." But the moment, it's for Peter. He feels weak. is tense. He feels fragile. His back is against the wall. This is about those moments in your life and in my life, those moments where the deck is stacked against you. You feel fragile. You don't know what to do. What do you do in those moments? I would argue we are all sword-grabbing creatures. We want to do something that makes us feel powerful in those moments, don't we? In our weakness, when we feel fragile, I don't know what to do. I'm angry. I can't control it. I can't make my mother-in-law do this. I can't make him do this. I can't change AT&T's phone rate, whatever. I want to do. We grab swords because swords feel powerful, don't they? So Peter, he grabs the sword. A couple of days ago, or it was a couple months ago, I was flying out of the airport, which is where things like that happen, and I was with my 5-year-old Hayden, and as we're getting to the Southwest check-in station, we realize as we're printing our tickets out that our plane is delayed a couple of hours. And asked somebody there that said, yeah, it's weather, there's really nothing we can do. And you've seen this before. There is a gentleman in line next to us, and on this particular day, he is not having any of that excuse. And so he's just, his tone's elevating, he's getting angrier and angrier with the poor Southwest ticket agent, and she keeps saying again and again, I'm sorry, sir, there's nothing we can do, it's the weather, and he keeps just demanding they do something for him in this particular moment, and his poor wife is standing there, and she just has this look on her face like, we do this somewhere every week. It'll probably be at Outback later tonight when his bloomin' onion's wrong, just that moment, and he's tilting the entire emotional axis of Terminal 2 in his direction, and he's getting angry, and then he says the thing that you maybe have said at some point when you're furious and you're angry. He said, let me speak to your supervisor. What is that? It's a sword. It's a sword. He's bumped into Southwest Airlines. He can't do anything about it. He's quite literally bumped into the weather. God himself is not on this gentleman's side on this particular afternoon. And in an effort, in a moment to try to feel strong and in control, let me speak to your supervisor. As if the supervisor is going to come out with an iPad. I'm sorry, sir, you're right. We can control the weather. It just feels good, doesn't it, in those moments? We're quite weak, but we want to feel quite strong. So we grab a sword. Let me speak to your, we want to do something. A couple of days ago, I was on the 78, and it was one of those moments where a motorcycle police officer starts to swerve, and all the cars have to slow down to 40 miles an hour. And what erupts around me in traffic is a symphony of car horns. As if the police officer is going to go, I did not realize there were all these cars back there. Or I didn't realize I was inconveniencing all it. What is the car horn? It's a sword. Yeah, it feels strong in that moment, but you're up against the police department. You're up, and you don't really know what he's doing, protecting a duck. You have no fighting crime. There's a murder. You don't know, but you're angry and you're. It's a sword. You can't do anything about it. You're weak. You've bumped into something you can't change. The sword. Swords feel good. Maybe you're a person. Maybe you know somebody. When you get angry, you stomp your foot. You shout. Maybe you even let a few bowling words sort of slide in that moment. And it feels like when you scream, when you shout, it feels like you're beating your chest. It feels like you're strong, like you're actually doing something. But at a deeper level, that declaration of strength, isn't it actually just a declaration of weakness? You can't do anything. You can shout, you can scream, you can swear at people, but it's a sword. It's all you can really reach for in that moment. And that declaration of strength at a deeper level is just a declaration of weakness. I can't actually do anything at all. By nature, we all go for a sword when our back is against the wall, the deck is stacked against us, we're frustrated, the day's not going the way that we want it to go. In moments of family interactions, relationships, in moments where you can't find what you're looking, it's our net. We go for the sword, but it's actually quite weak. Now, Jesus is going to say something to Peter that sort of explains the paradox and explains the way that he's inviting Peter to live. For 3.5 years, Peter, we've done business a particular way. We're not changing today. We're not going to keep Van Goghing people around here, cutting off ears left and right. We're going a different way, Peter. And this is what he says. Somebody just got the Van Gogh joke. Good. You and me, we could hang out. We'd be friends. Where are we? Verse 52, Jesus says to Peter, Peter, put your sword back in its place. Jesus said to him, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. How many of us have heard this before? Very common phrase, all who live by the sword die by the sword. He says, Peter, put the sword away. That's not how we do business. Peter, you've been hanging out with me for a while. How many times when we haven't gotten our way do we get a sword out? No, that's not the way this whole operation is going to work. And he says something that we quote a lot, we misquote a lot. All who live by the sword, draw the sword, will die by the sword. I even heard an ESPN commentator not that long ago use this reference, talking about a quarterback who always scrambles and runs, and he got hurt, tore his ACL. And the commentator said, well, you live by the run, you die by the run. We use it to explain if you engage in some kind of risky behavior, you need to understand the consequences. That's not what Jesus means. Even at a surface level, he's not talking about weaponry, because if he was, that's not even true. It's not everyone who's ever shot a gun is going to die by the gun. He's talking about something at a deeper level, a worldview, and he's inviting Peter, the disciples. He's been inviting Peter and the disciples, and he's going to model at the cross a different way forward. And he's essentially saying, Peter, swords, they have this appearance of strength, but they're actually quite weak. We want to reach for them and we want to fight. We want to but it actually, in that moment, we're actually just weak. They're not powerful. They're not going to accomplish what you want them to accomplish. And I would say in the 21st century world, at a very early age, we start to live by the sword. We start to look around and we start identifying exterior enemies, and we start to say, he's the problem with the world. She's the problem with the world. We grab a sword and we want to start going after people. We do this at a very early age. In elementary school, it's the bully on the playground. They're the problem with the world. If only they would change. We grab a sword, and there's something in those moments when we name it, when we say something, we feel like we're powerful, like we're actually doing something. So it's the bully on the playground. It's bedtime. That's the problem with the world when you're in elementary school. You go to middle school, you go to high school, every middle school student, every high school student in this room, you have evolved. You now realize what the real problem with the world is, and it's what? Mom and dad, yeah, they're the problem with the world. Identify the exterior enemy. You feel strong when you do. Grab the sword. If only they would bend to my will. If only they saw it my way. If only they did things the way that they were supposed to. Then you go off to college and you start to figure out the system. That's the problem with the world. Some system out there. That's the problem with the world. And there certainly are a lot of things that are wrong with the world, but you start naming it. It's the system, and a little bit still mom and dad. That's the problem with the world. Grab the sword, name the exterior enemy. Then maybe somewhere along the way, you get married, you fall in love. Love is what's right with the world. It's me and her versus the world. This feels good. You start naming the same enemies. You start saying these are the same problems with the world. Then what happens? 5-10 years into marriage, you're sitting in a therapist's office going, she's the problem with the world. He's the problem with the world. We just keep living by the sword. We keep grabbing the sword. Name the exterior enemy. It feels strong in that moment. Then you have a couple of kids. Nothing unites the warring tribes like a common enemy, does it? Kids won't sleep. They're the problem with the world. Politics, everything works this way. The Democrat, the Republican, they're the problem. They're the problem. This group of people, that's the problem. People who do, people who don't. This is the problem with the world. And if you start to take this Jesus thing serious, if you start to enter into this paradox, at whatever age, stage of life, you start to take up the way of Jesus, you start to put the yoke of Jesus on, and you say, I'm interested in this. All of a sudden, when you come to Jesus, you stop saying, that's the problem with the world, that's the problem with the world, that's the problem with the world. And the gospel is this moment where you say, oh my goodness, I'm the problem with the world. I'm the problem. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff in the world broken, but I have participated in the dysfunction in my own life. I have participated in contributing to the pain of the world. Something in me is broken. It might be that moment when a relationship that you wanted to work didn't work, and it was something that you said, something you did, and you realize, oh my goodness, it's me. It might be that moment you realize you have everything that you ever wanted and you're still not happy. You go, wait a second, something in me is fundamentally broken. It might be that moment with a family member, a friend. You didn't just burn a bridge. You torched the whole river, and you look back on it and you're like, I don't know why I act that way. Oh my goodness, something in here is broken. The enemy's not out there. The enemy is in here. And this invites you, it beckons you to go the way of the cross, not the way of the sword. That's the way that we've been modeling, Peter. That's the way we're going forward, Peter, the way of the cross. And it's that moment in your life where you start to realize there's something in here that's broken. Maybe you look back over all the relationships in your life and you've seen them. After a period of time, they come to an end. You go, oh my goodness, I'm the common denominator in all this pain and hurt. I'm the problem with the world. And you come to the cross and you say, I'm a person that needs forgiveness. I'm a person that needs grace. And when you begin to do that, in the moment, it feels like weakness, doesn't it? To put the sword down, start to stare at the cross and say, I need that to move forward. It feels like weakness because it requires humility. It requires an admittance. I have something wrong in here. And the moment that you do, what happens? When you actually embrace the weakness, all of a sudden, through the cross, not the sword, you begin to become strong. This is the way Paul says it in 2 Corinthians 5. I love this verse. He puts it in this beautiful sort of paradoxical phrasing. He says this, 2 Corinthians 5, verse 21. This is Paul. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us. God made him who couldn't break anything to become sin for us who are just destined to break things, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Another way you could say that, God who is strong. And this is the paradox that sits at the heart of the Christian faith. God who is strong became weak on the cross so that you and I, who are actually weak, could become strong. And you come to the cross. On the surface, it feels like weakness, doesn't it? I have to admit, I'm broken. I have to admit there's something wrong with me, but you come to the cross. Now all of a sudden at the cross, you start getting lifted up. You start to feel better about yourself. You start to go through life with a sense of purpose, a sense of joy. And when you see somebody do something wrong, you're not grabbing the sword. There's something in you. Your first instinct, because you're a recipient of grace, is to be a dispenser of it. And all of a sudden, the way of the cross begins to take hold, not just in a moment when you pray to invite Jesus in your life, but it's a way forward for the rest of your life, and how you behave, how you treat yourself, how you begin to treat others is the way of the cross. And this beautiful paradox, God who was strong became weak so that you who are weak could become strong. And the only way you get strength is to go to the cross. It's through weakness. And at the heart of the Christian faith, Christianity at its core, at its heart, it's not about, we need to believe some stuff, and it's part of it, but it's about this idea of leaving illusion and beginning to embrace reality. That's all the Christian faith is. It's leaving what's not true behind and embracing what is actually true, which is why it's not, well, I guess as Christians, we need to act weak. We need to try to be weak. Yeah, I'm going to really work on my weakness. So that's my prayer request for the small group. I need to, be a little bit weak. No, it's beginning to understand and embrace reality. You actually are quite weak. And when you start to step into that truth, all of a sudden you start to realize you can actually gain real strength. This is the way Paul says it 7 chapters later in 2 Corinthians verse 9 of chapter 12. He says about this affliction, this weakness that he has. A lot of people aren't quite sure what it is. Some people say it's Paul had people that were following him from town to town, like hecklers, and he's trying to get rid of it. It's a weakness, and he's angry. And finally, Jesus comes to him and says, "This, Paul, this is what you need to know about this oppression, about this weakness. My grace is sufficient for you, Paul, for my power is made perfect." Where? In what? Weakness. Huh? That's not how it works. And Jesus says there's a different way forward. "Therefore, I will boast," Paul says, "all the more gladly about my weaknesses." Who in the world does that? "So that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why," Paul says, "for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses." Kind of a weird guy, isn't he? "I delight in weaknesses and insults and hardships and persecutions and difficulties." Why? "For when I am weak, then I am what I am." It's at the cross. It's the way of the cross. Not the way of the sword. The sword looks strong to anyone watching. Oh my goodness, he's got a sword. But to reality, it's actually just weakness. And the way you gain actual strength is you come to Jesus, you go to the cross, you admit you need help, you admit you need grace, and it's there you begin to gain actual strength. His power is made perfect in your weakness. You can go through life crossing your arms, stomping your foot, shouting at everything that goes wrong, picking up a sword, naming exterior enemies, and you will feel quite strong on the surface. And people will look at you and go, "Wow, he's strong enough to yell. He's strong enough to honk. He's strong enough to get angry." But in reality, it's a declaration of weakness. And if you want actual strength, you get weak enough, you get humble enough to come to the cross. And when you do, his power is made perfect in your weakness. His strength is manifested. It's on display when you're in that moment. And that moment of weakness, when you actually come to the cross, is the first moment you actually begin to gain strength. It's the first moment the power of God begins to take up residence in your life, and you start to realize grace, mercy, this way of the cross is better than the way of the sword. You want strength? You go to the cross. You want strength? It's the Easter story. Through the cross, you and I are made strong. Jesus continues, in this moment, swords, clubs, arrested. He's the only one in the room who's calm, by the way. And notice, this is what Jesus says to Peter. "Do you not think, Peter, do you not think, soldiers who are arresting me, I cannot call my Father and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels," around 72,000 angels. In other words, Peter, if we were going to go the way of the sword, we'd win. If that was the goal, to pick up the sword, but this thing that we've been doing for 3.5 years, in moments of tension, in moments of violence, in moments where people have threatened us, we have never mirrored evil with evil. We've never responded the way people have treated us. That's not the way forward, Peter. And he says this, "How would the scriptures then be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way?" Peter, I'm not going the way of the sword. We've been talking about the way of the cross. We're going to the cross. And at the cross, it's going to look like weakness, but I'm telling you, it's actual strength. Actually, in that moment, it's going to be the moment all of history is going to be split in half, and we're not going the way of the sword. If Jesus, and you cannot argue this, whether you are a Christian or not, that Jesus Christ of Nazareth is the central figure of strength throughout all of history, of all the navies that ever sailed the oceans, of all the armies that have ever been fielded, of all the elections that have been won, of all the kings that have ever sat on thrones. Only Jesus Christ has been powerful enough and strong enough to split history. And yet at the same time, if I were to ask you, how do you get power? How do you gain strength? What are the symbols of strength? You get a promotion. You win the election. You become the king. You field an army. You get a navy to sail. That's what you do for actual strength. And yet Jesus Christ of Nazareth never fielded an army, did he? He never won an election. And yet he is the strongest figure throughout all of history because his way ultimately proved to be the right way. The way of the cross is the way to gain strength, not the way of the sword. Ultimately, it does not work. And he's modeling it for Peter in this moment. Peter, don't you get it? I know you're strong enough, Peter, to pick up the sword and to fight, but are you strong enough to be kind? Only the cross gives you that kind of power. I know you're strong enough to hate somebody. I know you're strong enough when somebody sends you a nasty email to send a nasty email back. But are you actually strong enough to be kind? Only the cross can give you that ability. Are you strong enough when somebody doesn't deserve grace to give them grace? Peter, I know you're strong enough to pick up the sword, but are you strong enough in this particular moment to be kind? Are you strong enough as a follower of the cross? Are you strong enough? And only the cross can do this. If you just try to do this in your own strength, well, I'm going to just bite my tongue and I'm not going to say anything, you will lose. Ultimately, your temper will win out. Whatever it is that's inside of you, the way of the sword will become too appealing and alluring in that moment. Somebody will make you angry enough. Only the cross can give you this kind of power where you know where actual strength comes from. And when you have received that kind of a grace and someone makes you angry, you are now free to give that kind of a grace away. But only the cross does that. Only at the cross you gain actual strength. Are you strong enough, Peter, to be kind? Are you strong enough to be that kind of a person? I know you're strong enough to pick up the sword, but that's not the way this revolution is going to go. And then he says this, and he keeps teaching in this moment. I love the way that he's teaching Peter and the crowd. He says, in that hour, so again, you've got cuffs on Jesus. You've got swords, you've got clubs. The army has bowed up in the direction of Jesus. And this is what he says. He's calm, he's cool, he's collected. Am I leading a rebellion that you have to come out with swords and clubs to capture me? In other words, you guys look ridiculous. Ever had that moment with someone who's, they're shouting and screaming at you, I'm gonna get my way, they're grabbing swords, and you're going, really? Do you realize you look ridiculous in this particular moment? And you're just calm and cool and collect, or maybe you've been the angry one and someone has said that to you and you're like, I am kind of ridiculous right now. He's just showing them in this moment. The sword does not work. Every day I sat in the temple courts, guys, I was teaching and you did not arrest me. In other words, I'm not that hard to find. What's with the charade, Judas? Why the whole parade of swords and clubs? What in the world? But this all had to happen. In other words, yeah, this was the plan. Taking place that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled. In other words, that the way the sword was going to be defeated, this is the way it's going to be defeated, not with a bigger sword. This was the way it was going to happen. Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. And notice Jesus in this moment, kind, calm, cool, collected, alone. All the disciples. We're going to look at the story of Peter the week after Easter and see his journey. But even Peter in this moment, he flees. He doesn't know what to do because the way of the sword, man, it feels so much better than the way of the cross. But in this particular moment, how is Jesus responding? The cross. This way, Peter. It's better than the way of the sword. Just some questions before we come and take the elements of communion. And only the cross gives you access to this kind of power. Only the cross can transform your heart to have this kind of strength. But just a few questions. These are questions I want to ask my boys. These are questions that I think as a church, as we move forward into the work that God has given us, for you in your office when somebody makes you angry, in your family when someone says something, does something, when you're not quite sure what to do, when you're not quite sure you can take the risk that you're supposed to take. Just a few questions, because how does Jesus respond in this moment? Here's the first question. Are you strong enough to be kind? I know you're strong enough when someone says something terrible to you. I know you're strong enough to say something terrible back. But if you're a recipient of grace and you've come to the cross and the cross has actually given you real strength, are you strong enough to give grace back? Are you strong enough to dispense grace in that moment? Are you strong enough to be kind? Are you strong enough to be that? As the cross, by the way, the way you know this cross thing is starting to work in your life is when you stop saying that everybody else is bigoted and wrong and terrible and you're the only perfect person in the world. That's how you know the cross is starting to take hold in your life. And you become the kind of person that doesn't need to pick up the sword, the way of grace, the way of the cross. You begin to move forward. You're strong enough to be kind. How does Jesus respond in this moment? He's calm. Everybody else is filled with anxiety. Everybody else is, don't let them do that to you, Jesus. Everybody else is trying to model the way of the sword. But the way of the cross asks this question over our life. Are you strong enough to be calm? because you don't need to win in that moment. When everybody else is drawing the line in the sand, there's this sense of these are just all people that need grace. When you're in that moment, everybody else is anxious, trying to position, trying to figure out what to do. The way of the cross, it just makes you calm. Are you strong enough to be calm? Maybe another question. How is Jesus left in this moment? It says all the disciples deserted him and fled. Let me ask you a third question. Are you strong enough when you feel alone? Maybe you're here today and in your family, in your office, you feel like you're the only one that cares about what matters the most. Are you strong enough when you feel alone? And certainly we don't want anyone to go through life feeling that way. That's why we do church. But when you do, when you find yourself in that moment, everyone else has turned their back and gone away. The cross and the cross alone is what gives us strength, real strength. Are you strong enough when you feel alone? And it's not saying, well, we need to act weak. That's part of being a Christian. No, it's admitting things the way they actually are. And the only way we gain real strength is through coming to the end of ourselves, coming to the cross, saying the problem's in here, not out there. We gain actual strength in that moment. I want that for you. I want that for our church. We're going to take the elements of communion. Ushers, you can come forward at this time. As you do, I just ask these 3 questions over your life. This week, someone says something, are you strong enough to be kind? Are you strong enough to give grace? I know you're strong enough to pick up the sword, Peter, but are you strong enough to model a different way in a world of swords? As we come, if for some reason you can't stand, just raise your hand and someone will bring the elements of communion to you. If you're a Christ follower, we invite you to come to the table. God bless you as you come. You want real strength in life. You humble yourself and you take these elements into your body. And the weak are made strong, not through swords, but through sacrifice. And it's at the body, it's at the blood of Christ. We were singing about the unrighteous are made righteous, the unclean are made clean. You and I are made new. And at this time, would you take the body? Would you take the bread? I don't know what makes you feel weak in life. Parenting, school, your job, what feels like the deck is stacked against you right now. I don't even know what to do. Through coming to the cup, body, the blood, we're promised a strength through these elements that lifts us up beyond our comprehension. Would you take the cup with me? And Jesus, we thank you, not through the work that we do, not through the efforts, not through the change that we think we can have, the influence we think we can have, but through you and you alone, strength can enter into the world. And I thank you for the example that you literally left hung on the door of humanity, the cross. All who see it know what it means. This cross, this symbol for centuries of weakness is now this symbol of strength. That we can access divine power in our life. And I just pray for somebody within the sound of my voice who maybe more than other days in their life, they need that today. And we ask that you cover us in your strength. We ask that for those of us that have humbled ourselves and admitted we cannot be strong enough on our own, would we gain the strength that you offer today, Jesus. And it's in Jesus' name that all of God's children said, amen. Well, if you need prayer today, we invite you to come forward. There's folks who would love to pray with you, counselors who'd love to pray with you and pray for you. If you're new with us, we'd love to say hello to you at the blue wall in the atrium. We're going to continue this series, Paradox, together next week. God bless you, my brothers and sisters. May you go in the grace of Jesus, the peace of Jesus. We'll see you next week. Take care.